I worked as a park ranger. The forest logged me out in the small town of Evergreen Valley. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forest's life moved at a languid pace, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and secrets were as rare as snow in summer, at least. That's what I thought growing up. My name is Daniel Cooper, and this is the story of how my ordinary life in Evergreen Valley took a turn into the extraordinary and terrifying. It's a tale of friendship, search, loss, and the dark underbelly of a town that seemed too perfect on the surface. I was born and raised in Evergreen Valley, the only child of Mary and John Cooper. My father worked as a forest ranger, while my mother taught at the local elementary school. Our house, a cozy two-story colonial, sat at the edge of town, bordering the vast expanse of whispering woods. From as early as I can remember, the forest was my playground, while other kids spent their summers at the community park pool or the baseball diamond. I was scaling trees, building forts, and pretending to be an explorer in uncharted wilderness. It was during one of these solo adventures at the age of 8 that I met the person who would become my best friend and ultimately change the course of my life forever. I was attempting to cross Miller's Creek on a fallen log when I lost my balance. Just as I was about to plunge into the icy water, a hand grabbed my arm, steadying me. I looked up to see a boy about my age with unruly red hair and a face full of freckles grinning at me. "Whoa, there, buddy, that was a close one," he said, helping me regain my footing. "Thanks," I mumbled, embarrassed at nearly falling in front of a stranger. "I'm Chris Harley," he said, extending his hand. "You live around here?" I shook his hand, introducing myself. "Yeah, just on the edge of town. You're not from Evergreen Valley, are you? I haven't seen you at school." Grin widened. "Nope, just moved here last week. My dad got a job at some research place in the woods. Pretty boring stuff, if you ask me. So I figured I'd do some exploring instead of helping unpack." From that moment on, Chris and I were inseparable. We spent the rest of that summer exploring every inch of whispering woods we could reach. Chris was fearless, always pushing us to venture further, climb higher, and stay out later. He brought an excitement to my life that I hadn't realized Isaac was missing when school started in the fall. Chris and I found ourselves in the same class. We quickly became known as a package deal, where one of us went, the other was sure to follow. Our teachers often had to separate us to keep us from chatting during lessons. As we grew older, our bond only strengthened. We shared similar interests in music, movies, and books we both loved, science fiction, and spent countless hours discussing our favorite stories and coming up with our own fantastical tales. But it wasn't just our shared interests that cemented our friendship. Chris had a way of pushing me out of my comfort zone, encouraging me to take risks and stand up for myself. In return, I helped ground him when his impulsiveness threatened to get him into trouble. One memory that stands out vividly occurred when we were 13. There was a group of older boys who had been bullying some of the younger kids at school. Chris and I had managed to avoid their attention, but one day we saw them picking on a small, quiet boy named Ethan. Before I could stop him, Chris marched right up to the biggest of the bullies. "Hey," he shouted, his face red with anger. "Why don't you pick on someone your own size?" The bully, a hulking 8th grader named Brock, turned to Chris with a sneer. "Like you shrimp." I watched in horror as Brock shoved Chris hard, sending him sprawling onto the ground. Without thinking, I rushed forward, placing self between Chris and Brock. "Leave him alone," I said, my voice shaking. But determined, Brock looked surprised. For a moment, then burst out laughing. "Look at this," the dynamic duo thinks. "They're tough guys." Now he raised his fist and I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact, but it never came. Instead, I heard a stern voice cut through the tension. What's going on here? I opened my eyes to see Mr. Thompson, the school principal, standing there with his arms crossed. Brock and his cron quickly dispersed, mumbling excuses as Mr. Thompson helped Chris to his feet and checked if we were okay. I felt a mix of relief and exhilaration. It was the first time I had ever stood up to anyone like that, and even though I was terrified, it felt good. Later that day, as Chris and I walked home, he nudged me with his elbow. "Thanks for having my back there, Danny. That was pretty brave." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Well, I couldn't let you have all the fun, could I?" Chris laughed, throwing an arm around my shoulders. "You know what? We make a pretty good team." From that day forward, our friendship took on a new dimension. We weren't just two kids who liked hanging out together anymore. We were a team watching each other's backs and facing the world side by side. As we entered high school, Chris and I remained as close as ever, but our interests began to diverge slightly. I developed a passion for photography, spending hours capturing the beauty of Whispering Woods through my camera lens. Chris, on the other hand, became increasingly fascinated by technology and engineering. Despite these differences, we always made time for each other. Our weekend adventures in the woods continued now, with the added excitement of me documenting our explorations through photographs and Chris bringing along various gadgets he had tinkered with. It was during one of these outings in the spring of our junior year that the course of our lives would change forever. We had no way of knowing that the discovery we were about to make would unravel the fabric of our quiet town and test the limits of our friendship as we ventured deeper into Whispering Woods than we ever had before. Neither of us could have imagined the shadows that lurked beyond the trees, waiting to draw us into a mystery that would consume our lives and leave an indelible mark on Evergreen Valley. The day that changed everything started like any other Saturday in late April. The air was crisp with a lingering chill of early spring, but the sun shone brightly, promising warmer days ahead. Chris and I had planned to explore a section of Whispering Woods we had never ventured into before. I arrived at Chris's house just after dawn, my backpack loaded with snacks, water, and my trusty camera. Chris answered the door, his red hair sticking up in all directions, clearly having just rolled out of bed. "Morning sunshine," I teased. "Ready for our big adventure?" Chris yawned dramatically. "Give me 5 minutes to grab my stuff and chug some coffee." As we set out, the morning dew still clinging to the grass, I couldn't shake a strange feeling of anticipation. It was more than our usual excitement for exploration. Something in the air felt different, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. We followed our usual path into the woods, but instead of turning east towards Miller's Creek as we normally did, we continued north. The trees grew denser, the underbrush thicker, making our progress slow and deliberate. After a couple of hours of hiking, we came across an old, overgrown trail that didn't appear on any of our maps. Chris's eyes lit up with that familiar spark of curiosity. "What do you say we check it out?" he asked already. Stepping onto the hidden path, I hesitated for a moment. The trail seemed to lead deeper into a part of the forest that looked darker, more primeval somehow. But Chris was already forging ahead and I didn't want to be left behind as we followed the overgrown path. The forest around us changed subtly. The trees seemed older, their trunks wider, and gnarled with age. The canopy above grew so thick that only slivers of sunlight penetrated, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. "Danny, check this out," Chris called from up ahead. I jogged to catch up with him and saw what had caught his attention. Half hidden by vines and moss was a weathered wooden sign. Chris brushed away some of the growth, revealing faded letters. "Evergreen Research Facility," Chris read aloud, his voice tinged with excitement. "Property of the rest is too faded to make out Evergreen Research Facility." I echoed, a chill running down my spine. Despite the warmth of the day, I've never heard of anything like that around here. Chris was already pulling out his phone, fingers flying over the screen as he searched for information. "Nothing comes up online," he muttered, frowning. "This is weird, Danny. Your dad's a forest ranger. Has he ever mentioned anything like this?" I shook my head. "Never, but you know how it is with Dad. He doesn't talk much about his work." A mischievous grin spread across Chris's face. "Well, there's only one way to find out what this place is." Before I could protest, he was pushing through the underbrush beyond the sign. With a sigh, I followed my camera at the ready to document whatever we might find. After another 15 minutes of struggling through dense vegetation, the forest suddenly opened up into a large clearing. In the center stood a complex of dilapidated buildings, their concrete walls stained and crumbling partially. "Reclaimed by nature, holy crap," Chris whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. I raised my camera, snapping photo after photo of the abandoned facility. The main building was 3 stories tall, with broken windows deeping like empty eye sockets. Smaller structures surrounded it, including what looked like a garage and several storage sheds. As we approached the main building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I turned, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Chris, maybe we should head back," I suggested, my voice quavering slightly. "Report this to my dad or something." But Chris was already at the main entrance, examining the heavy metal door. "It's not locked. It's us, sir," he said, excitement evident in his voice. "Come on. Danny, where's your sense of adventure?" Before I could answer, he had pushed the door open with a loud creak and disappeared inside, cursing under my breath. I followed him, the darkness of the building swallowing me whole. The interior was a maze of corridors and rooms, most filled with rusted equipment and scattered papers. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of decayed items. I used the flash on my camera to light our way, the bright bursts illuminating scenes of abandonment and neglect. "What do you think they were researching here?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty hallways. Chris shrugged, rifling through a stack of moldy documents on a desk. "Hard to say. Most of this stuff is too damaged to read, but look at some of this equipment. It looks advanced, way more high tech than you'd expect for an old, abandoned place like this." As we delve deeper into the facility, the sense of unease grew stronger. In one room, we found rows of large cylindrical tanks, their glass clouded and cracked. Another contained cages of various sizes, some with peculiar scratch marks along the bars Danny Chris called from across the room. "You need to see this." I made my way over to where he stood in front of a large metal cabinet. The doors hung open, revealing rows of labeled glass vials. Most were empty or broken, but a few still contained small amounts of luminescent liquids and various colors. "What is this stuff?" I wondered, aloud, raising my camera to take a photo. Just as I pressed the shutter button, a loud crash echoed through the building, causing both of us to jump. The sound seemed to come from somewhere below us. Chris's eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and excitement. "There must be a basement level. Come on, let's check it out." "Are you crazy?" I hissed. That could be anything. The floor caving in an animal, or worse. But Chris was already moving towards the hallway. Or it could be answers. He called back, "Don't you want to know what this place really is?" Reluctantly, I followed him. We found a stairwell leading down the steps, slick, with some kind of dark, damp substance. The further we descended, the colder the air became, until I could see my breath misting in front of me. The basement level was a single cavernous room filled with massive machinery. Most of it was dark and silent, covered in years of dust and cobwebs. But in the center of the room stood a device unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was a towering construct of metal and glass with a central column that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. Tubes and wires sprawled out from it like the tentacles of some mechanical octopus, connecting to various consoles around the room. Chris approached it, his hand stretched as if in a trance. "It's warm," he murmured as his fingers touched the metal surface. Suddenly the machine hummed to life. Lights flickered across its surface and the central column began to glow brighter. A computerized voice crackled through hidden speakers, warning, "Unauthorized activation detected. Initiating containment protocol." Before either of us could react, a blinding flash of light erupted from the machine. I felt a wave of energy wash over me, knocking me off my feet as my vision cleared. I looked around frantically for Chris. He was gone. Where Chris had been standing moments before, there was now only empty space. The machine pulsed once more, then fell, silent, the lights fading back to their previous dim glow. "Chris," I screamed, my voice echoing in the vast, empty room. "Chris, where are you?" But there was no answer. My best friend had vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the bowels of a mysterious facility that by all rights shouldn't even exist. As the reality of the situation sank in panic, overwhelmed me, I scrambled up the stairs, out of the building and into the fading daylight. My lungs burned as I ran through the forest branches, whipping at my face until I finally burst out onto the familiar streets of Evergreen Valley. I didn't stop running until I reached the police station, bursting through the doors and collapsing onto the floor, gasping for air as concerned officers gathered around me. I tried to explain what had happened between ragged breaths, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew how insane it all sounded. An abandoned research facility, hidden in the woods, strange machines and glowing liquids, and worst of all, my best friend vanishing into thin air. Skeptical looks on the officer faces told me everything I needed to know. They didn't believe me, and why should they? It sounded like the plot of a bad science fiction movie, not something that could happen in quiet, normal Evergreen Valley as I sat in the police station repeating my story to increasingly doubtful authorities whatever had happened in that facility, whatever had taken Chris. It was far from over the mystery of Whispering Woods and the Evergreen research facility had only just begun, and I was now irrevocably entangled in its dark and dangerous web. The days following Chris's disappearance passed in a blur of police, interviews, search parties, and sleepless nights. The authorities treated it as a missing person case, but their efforts were focused on the areas of Whispering Woods that we normally frequented, not the uncharted territory where the research facilities stood. I tried multiple times to lead search parties to the facility, but each attempt ended in failure. It was as if the path we had taken that fateful day had vanished, swallowed up by the dense forest. The more I insisted on the existence of the abandoned buildings, the more doubtful and concerned the adults around me became. My parents were beside themselves with worry, both for Chris and for my mental state. I overheard them discussing the possibility of trauma-induced delusions, and the word therapy was mentioned more than once. Chris's parents, the Hartley, were devastated. Mrs. Hartley spent most of her time either crying or staring blankly at the wall, while Mr. Hartley threw himself into organizing search efforts with a frantic energy that bordered on mania. I couldn't bring myself to look them in the eye, feeling a crushing guilt for not having stopped Chris from entering that accursed building. As the days turned into weeks, the initial phase of the search began to die down, the police having found no trace of Chris or the mysterious facility I described started to treat the case as a potential runaway situation. This theory gained traction when it was discovered that some of Chris's clothes and his emergency cash stash were missing from his room, but I knew the truth hadn't run away. He had vanished before my very eyes, taken by something beyond our understanding. The problem was, I had no way to prove it. It was during this time that I noticed strange things starting to happen around town. At first, they were small, easily dismissed occurrences. Lights flickering, more often than usual, electronics behaving erratically, an unusually high number of pets going missing from their yards. Then the nightmares began. Every night I found myself back in that basement watching Chris disappear over and over again. But in my dreams, I could hear him screaming, calling out for help from some impossibly distant place. I would wake up in a cold sweat, his cries echoing in my ears as the summer wore on. My obsession with finding the truth grew. I spent every free moment singing through Old Town records, researching the history of Whispering Woods and trying to find any mention of the Evergreen research facility. My room became a chaos of maps, printouts, and hastily scribbled notes. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I made my first real breakthrough. Buried in the archives of the local library, I found a newspaper clipping from 1962. The headline read, "Government approves new research facility in Whispering Woods." The article was vague about the nature of the research, citing only advancements in energy and physics as the facility's purpose, but it was proof that I wasn't crazy, that the facility had existed armed with this new information. I went to the police station, hoping they would reopen the case. Officer Brennan, a kindly, middle-aged man who had always been patient with me, listened as I excitedly explained my Discovery, Daniel, he said gently when I finished. I understand you're still hurting from Chris's disappearance. We all are, but this article, it's from over 60 years ago. Even if this facility did exist back then, it doesn't prove anything about what happened to Chris. I left the station feeling defeated, but more determined than ever. If the authorities wouldn't help me, I'd have to find the truth on my own. It was around this time that I noticed someone new in town, a woman in her early 30s with short, dark hair and intense green eyes. I first saw her at the local diner, sitting alone in a booth, scribbling furiously in a notebook. What caught my attention was the way she kept glancing around as if checking to see if anyone was watching her. Over the next few days, I saw her several more times around town, always alone, always watchful. My curiosity piqued. I decided to follow her one afternoon. As she left the diner, she led me to the edge of town, right up to the border of Whispering Woods. There she met with a man I recognized as Dr. Harris, the high school physics teacher. They spoke in hushed tones, their body language tense and urgent. As I crept closer to try and overhear their conversation, I accidentally stepped on a dry twig. The sharp crack seemed to echo through the trees. Both the woman and Dr. Harris whipped around, their eyes scanning the area. I ducked behind a large oak tree, my heart pounding when I peeked out again. They were gone, as if they had vanished into thin air that night. As I lay in bed, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, a soft tapping sound came from my window. Cautiously, I approached, pulling back the curtain to find a folded piece of paper stuck to the outside of the glass. With trembling hands, I opened the window and retrieved the note inside. In neat, precise handwriting were 5 words that sent a chill down my spine. We need to talk, Harris. As I stared at the note, a mix of fear and excitement coursed through me. Finally, someone was reaching out, someone who might have answers. But why the secrecy? And how was Dr. Harris involved in all of this? Little did I know this mysterious message would be the key to unlocking a conspiracy far larger and more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The quiet town of Evergreen Valley was about to reveal its darkest secrets, and I was standing at the threshold of a truth that would change everything. The next day at school, I could barely focus on my classes. My eyes kept darting to the clock, counting down the minutes until my scheduled physics class with Dr. Harris. As I entered the classroom, our eyes met briefly, and I saw him give an almost imperceptible nod. After class, as the other students filed out, Dr. Harris called out, "Could you stay back for a moment? I'd like to discuss your last assignment." Heart pounding, I approached his desk. Once we were alone, Dr. Harris's demeanor changed completely. The friendly, slightly absent-minded teacher was replaced by a man with a grave expression and eyes that darted nervously to the door. "Daniel," he said in a low voice, "what you saw yesterday, you must understand the danger. You're in. The woman I was meeting, her name is Agent Lydia Chen. She's with let's call it a specialized branch of the government." I opened my mouth to ask a question, but Dr. Harris held up a hand to stop me. "No, let me finish. We don't have much time. The facility you found, the one where Chris disappeared, it wasn't abandoned. It was dormant, and now, because of what happened with Chris, it's active again." My mind reeled with this information. But what is it? What were they doing there? And what happened to Chris, Dr. Harris sighed heavily. The full truth is complicated and dangerous, but I'll tell you what, Ike and the Evergreen Research Facility was built to study and experiment with interdimensional travel. He must have seen the skepticism on my face, because he quickly added, I know how it sounds, Daniel, but after what you saw happen to Chris, can you really discount the possibility? I thought back to that moment in the basement, the flash of light, Chris, vanishing into thin air. Slowly I nodded. The experiments they were conducting, they were groundbreaking, but incredibly dangerous. There were incidents, people disappearing, strange phenomena occurring in town. Eventually, the government shut it down. Or so we thought. I interrupted. Dr. Harris gave a sad smile. Yes, I was a young researcher there, fresh out of college when they shut us down. Most of us were reassigned or sworn to secrecy. I chose to stay in Evergreen Valley to keep an eye on things, make sure it stayed dormant, but now it's active again. I said, the implications slowly sinking in. Because of us, because of me and Chris. Dr. Harris nodded gravely. And that's not the worst of it. Whatever took Chris, we think it might have been trying to come through to our side. A chill ran down my spine as I processed this information. So what do we do now? For now, you need to be careful. Don't trust anyone, not even your parents. There are people in this town who are not what they seem. Dr. Harris scribbled something on a piece of paper and handed it to me. This is a secure email address. If you notice anything strange, anything at all, contact me immediately. As I left the classroom, my head spinning with this new information, I felt like I had stepped into a different world. The familiar hallways of Evergreen Valley High suddenly seemed alien and threatening. Every face I passed could be hiding secrets. Every shadow could be concealing something unnatural. That night, as I lay in bed, trying to process everything Dr. Harris had told me, a soft blue light began to emanate from my closet. Cautiously approached, my heart pounding in my chest. As I opened the closet door, I found the source of the light. My old walkie-talkie, the one Chris and I used to use during our childhood adventures, was glowing and emitting a low pulsing hum. With trembling hands, I picked it up. Through the static, I heard a voice, Chris's voice, faint and distorted but unmistakable. Danny, help, not alone here. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving me standing in the dark, clutching the now silent walkie-talkie. In that moment, I knew that no matter the risk, no matter the danger, I had to find a way to bring Chris back. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about reality, push the boundaries of science and the supernatural, and force me to confront the darkest secrets of Evergreen Valley. As I stood there in the dark, the echo of Chris's plea ringing in my ears, I made a silent vow. She would uncover the truth about the Evergreen Research Facility. I would find out what really happened to Chris, and I would bring him home no matter the cost. The quiet town of Evergreen Valley had become the center of a cosmic mystery. The days following Dr. Harris's revelation and Chris's mysterious transmission were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every casual conversation felt like it could be a carefully orchestrated interrogation. The weight of the secret I now carried pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. At school, I found myself scrutinizing my classmates and teachers, wondering who might be involved in the conspiracy. Was the cafeteria lady's lingering gaze sign of suspicion, or was I just being paranoid? Did Mr. Johnson, the janitor, always lingered near the science wing, or was he keeping an eye on Dr. Harris D? Started noticing other things too small, details that I might have overlooked. Before now seemed significant, the way certain streetlights in town would flicker in a specific pattern, the increasing number of weather balloons that seemed to hover over Whispering Woods, the subtle changes in people's behavior, a nervous tick here, an out-of-character comment there one afternoon, about a week after my conversation with Dr. Harris. I was walking home from school when I noticed something odd. A van was parked across the street from my house, its windows tinted so dark they were almost black. As I approached, the van started up and slowly drove away. Heart pounding, I rushed inside and up to my room. I pulled out my laptop and composed a quick email to Dr. Harris describing what I'd seen. His reply came within minutes. Stay calm. Don't do anything to arouse suspicion. Meet me at the old water tower at midnight. Come alone and make sure you're not followed the hours until midnight. Crawled by with agonizing slowness. I made a show of going to bed early, telling my parents I had a headache then. At 11:30, I quietly slipped out of my window and into the night. The old water tower stood at the edge of town, a rusted relic from a time before Evergreen Valley had a modern water system. As I approached, I saw a figure standing in its shadow for a moment. Fear gripped me. What if this was a trap? But then the figure stepped into the moonlight, revealing Dr. Harris's familiar face. Good, you made it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We don't have much time. They're watching us more closely now. Who's watching us? I asked. The same people who ran the facility. They never really left Evergreen Valley, just went underground. Now that the facility is active again, they're mobilizing. Dr. Harris reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device about the size of a cell phone. This is a prototype we were working on before the shutdown. It's designed to detect interdimensional energy fluctuations. I've modified it to home in on the specific frequency we recorded. When Chris disappeared, he handed me the device. It was heavier than it looked, with a small screen displaying a series of incomprehensible numbers and a pulsing dot. That dot represents the strongest source of interdimensional energy, Dr. Harris explained. Right now, it's pointing towards the facility in Whispering Woods, but it's been moving. I echoed, a chill running down my spine. Dr. Harris nodded grimly. Whatever came through when Chris disappeared, it's not staying put. It's exploring, learning, and I fear it may be looking for a way to bring more of its kind through. As if onto the device in my hand began to beep softly. The pulsing dot on the screen was moving, heading towards the edge of the screen. It's on the move again. Dr. Harris said, his voice tight with tension. We need to track it, try to understand what it's doing. But Daniel, you must promise me something. Do not under any circumstances try to confront this thing on your own. It's dangerous beyond your imagination. I nodded, my mouth dry with fear and excitement. What about Chris? Is there any way we can use this to find him? Dr. Harris's expression softened slightly. I'm working on it. The energy signature from the transmission you received, it was like nothing I've ever seen before. It's as if Chris is trapped between dimensions, able to reach out, but not fully cross over, but every time he makes contact, it leaves a trace. If we can collect enough of these traces, we might be able to triangulate his location in whatever space he's in. As we stood there in the shadow of the water tower, the gravity of the situation fully hit me. This wasn't just about finding Chris anymore. The fate of our entire town, maybe even our world, could be at stake. What do we do now? I asked. For now, we watch and wait. Dr. Harris replied, use the device to track the entity's movements, record any unusual occurrences in town, and most importantly, trust no one. The people behind the facility, they have eyes and ears everywhere. As I made my way home that night, the device hidden safely in my backpack, I felt as if I had crossed a point of no return. The quiet, normal life I had known was gone, replaced by a world of shadows, secrets, and cosmic horrors. Little did I know the true tests of my resolve and sanity were yet to come. The entity from the facility was just the beginning. Something far darker and more terrifying was stirring in the heart of Evergreen Valley, something that would push me to the very limits of what I thought was possible and beyond. As I climbed back through my bedroom window, the first light of dawn was just beginning to creep over the horizon. A new day was dawning in Evergreen Valley, but for me, it felt like the sun might never truly shine again. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I found myself jumping at every unexpected sound, scrutinizing every casual interaction for hidden meanings. The device Dr. Harris had given me became my constant companion, its soft beep being a reminder of the invisible threat lurking in our town. I started keeping a journal, meticulously recording every strange occurrence I noticed, lights flickering in patterns that seemed almost like code animals behaving erratically, as if fleeing from an unseen predator. And most disturbing of all, people in town starting to act different. It was subtle at first. Mrs. Avery, the sweet old lady who ran the local bakery, snapping at customers in a way that was completely out of character. The usually boisterous high school quarterback, suddenly quiet and withdrawn. My own parents having hushed conversations that would abruptly stop whenever I entered the room. But the most unsettling changes were happening to me. I started having vivid, terrifying dreams in them, so I would find myself wandering through twisted, impossible landscapes, alien geometries that hurt my eyes to look at, and always, in the distance, I could hear Chris calling for help. I would wake from these dreams drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. And sometimes in those moments, between sleep and waking, I could swear I saw shadows moving in the corners of my room, disappearing as soon as I turned to look at them directly. One night, about 3 weeks after my midnight meeting with Dr. Harris, I was jolted awake by the sound of static coming from my closet heart. Arsing I approached already, knowing what I would find. The old walkie-talkie was active again, glowing with that eerie blue light. I grabbed it, with trembling hands, straining to hear through the crackling static. Danny, it's getting stronger, can't hold on much longer. Chris's voice was weaker this time, barely audible through the static. They're changing people. Be careful. Don't trust the transmission. Cut off abruptly, leaving me clutching the silent walkie-talkie in the dark. My mind raced, trying to make sense of Chris's fragmented warning. Who was changing people and who couldn't I trust? I reached for the device Dr. Harris had given me, which I now kept on my Nightstand, the pulsing dot on the screen, was moving rapidly, heading towards the center of town. Without thinking, I threw on some clothes and sneaked out of the house. The streets were eerily quiet as I followed the signal the dot led me to. The town square, where I ducked behind a bush, peering out at the empty space for a moment. Nothing happened, then I saw it. A shimmer in the air like heat waves, rising from hot asphalt. But it was a cool night. The shimmer coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape, translucent and shifting. I held my breath, watching in horror and fascination as the entity moved across the square. It paused by the statue of the town's founder, reaching out with a limb that seemed to phase in and out of existence where it touched. The statue, the metal, began to corrode and twist, taking on impossible shapes. Suddenly, the entity's form flickered, and for a split second I saw something else. A mass of writhing tentacles, eyes that shouldn't exist, a mouthful of teeth that defied geometry. I bit back a scream, my mind reeling from what I just witnessed. The entity's head snapped in my direction, and I knew with certainty that it had sensed me. Without thinking, I turned and ran, not daring to look back. Didn't stop until I was back in my room, door locked, huddled under my blankets like a child, afraid of the dark. As the adrenaline wore off, I realized two things. First, I now had concrete proof that something otherworldly was loose in Evergreen Valley. And second, I was in way over my head the next morning. I emailed Dr. Harris describing what I'd seen. His reply was to meet me at the Old Quay after school. Don't tell anyone. The day crawled by, each minute feeling like an hour. When the final bell rang, I practically ran out of the school, my mind focused on the upcoming meeting. The old quarry was on the outskirts of town, long abandoned and overgrown. As I approached the meeting spot, I saw not just Dr. Harris, but the woman I'd seen him with before, Agent Chen Danielle. Dr. Harris said, his face grave. What you saw last night, it confirms our worst fears. The entity isn't just exploring, it's changing our reality little by little. Agent Chen stepped forward. We've been monitoring similar incidents across town. The entity seems to be preparing the environment for what we're not sure, but it can't be good. What about the people acting strange? I asked. Chris said something about them being changed. Dr. Harris and Agent Chen exchanged a look. We think the entity is capable of influencing people, Dr. Harris said, carefully, possibly even possessing them to some degree. Then how do we know who to trust? I demanded, fear and frustration bubbling up inside me. That's the problem, Agent, Chen said softly. We don't. As the implications of this sank in, I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet, both literally and figuratively. The world, as I knew it, was unraveling, and I was caught in the middle of it all. Little did I know this was just the beginning. The entity's presence was like a stone dropped in a pond, and the ripples were about to become waves that would threaten to drown us all. As we stood there in the quarry discussing plans and theories, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows seemed to grow longer. The wind whispered secrets just beyond my understanding, and somewhere in a place between dimensions, I knew Chris was still calling for help. The sun began to set, casting an eerie red glow over the quarry as we prepared to leave. Dr. Quay. Harris placed a hand on my shoulder. Remember Daniel, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of knowledge. In this new reality, we're facing nothing is as it seems. trust your instincts, question everything, and above all, be careful. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat as I made my way home in the gathering darkness. I realized that my quest to find Chris had become something much bigger, much more dangerous. I was now a player in a cosmic game with the fate of Evergreen Valley and perhaps the world hanging in the balance. The lights of my house came into view, and for a moment I hesitated. How could I face my parents, knowing what I knew? How could I pretend that everything was normal when reality itself was under attack? But I had no choice. I had to keep going, had to find a way to stop this entity and save Chris. As I walked up the driveway, I steeled myself for whatever challenges lay ahead. As autumn descended upon Evergreen Valley, bringing with it a chill in the air and leaves of gold and crimson, the sense of wrong in the town grew stronger. The entity's influence was spreading, subtle but unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at shadows and scrutinizing every interaction for signs of otherworldly influence. The device Dr. Harris had given me beeped it more frequently now, the pulsing dot on its screen moving in increasingly erratic patterns. 1. Crisp October morning. I woke to find a thin layer of frost on my bedroom window, but as I looked closer, I realized the frost wasn't forming random patterns. Instead, it seemed to be arranging itself into complex fractal-like shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. I quickly snapped a photo with my phone and sent it to Dr. Harris. His response came within minutes. It's accelerating. Meet at the library after school. Bring the device. The day crawled by, each class feeling like an eternity. I couldn't focus on the lessons, my mind constantly drifting to the frost patterns and what they might mean. When the final bell rang, I practically ran to the library. Dr. Harris and Agent Chen were waiting for me in a secluded corner of the reference section. Their faces were grim, and I could see the toll that recent events had taken on them. Dark circles underlined their eyes, and Dr. Harris's normally neat appearance was dished. Show us the device, Agent Chen said. Without preamble, I pulled it out of my backpack and handed it over. She studied the readouts, her frown deepening the energy. Signatures are off. The charts, she muttered. It's like the barrier between dimensions is getting thinner. Dr. Harris nodded solemnly. We've been picking up similar readings all over town. The entity isn't just influencing our reality anymore, it's merging it with its own. A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean for us, for the town, if we can't stop it? Dr. Harris said, his voice barely above a whisper. Evergreen Valley might cease to exist as we know it. It could become a pocket of alien reality, a beachhead for whatever lies on the other side to enter our world. The gravity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about finding Chris anymore. The entire town, maybe even the world, was at stake. But that's not all, Agent Chen added, her eyes meeting mine. We've been monitoring the frequencies of the transmissions you've been receiving from Chris. They're changing, becoming more coherent. My heart leapt. Does that mean we're closer to finding him, Dr. Harris? And Agent Chen exchanged a look. Possibly, Dr. Harris said cautiously, but it could also mean that wherever Chris is, it's being affected by the thinning of the dimensional barriers too. He might be able to reach out more easily, but so might other things. I finished a new fear. Gripping me, Agent Chen nodded. We need to act fast. We think we've pinpointed the epicenter of the dimensional disturbances. She was cut off by a sudden high-pitched whine from the device. The screen flickered, and for a moment I saw a series of symbols I didn't recognize flash across it. It's happening. Dr. Harris breathed his face. Pale the veil between dimensions. It's starting to tear as if onto the lights. In the library, flickered books began to fall from shelves, their pages flipping wildly as if caught in an unfelt wind. And then I heard it, a voice, not from the device but seemingly from the air around us. Danny, they're coming through. You have to stop them. It was Chris's voice, clearer than I'd ever heard it since his disappearance, but there was an edge of panic to it that made my blood run cold. Before any of us could react, a deafening crack split the air. A shimmer appeared in the center of the library, like heat, haze but more solid. It widened, forming a tear in the very fabric of reality. Through that tear, I caught a glimpse of a world that should not be impossible. Geometries, colors that had no name, and entities that defied description, and they were looking back at us. Run, Agent, Chen yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the exit. As we fled the library, I could hear inhuman sounds. Behind us, a cacophony of screeches and growls that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We burst out onto the street, only to find that the situation outside was no better. The sky had taken on a sickly swirling quality, and more tears were appearing. All over town, people were running, screaming as things beyond comprehension began to slip through into our world. We need to get to the facility, Dr. Harris panted as we ran. It's the source of all this. If we can shut it down, we might be able to close the tears as we raced through the chaos engulfed streets of Evergreen Valley. For one, realized that we had reached the point of no return. Turned the battle for our reality had begun, and I was right in the middle of it, with Chris's warning echoing in my mind and the fate of everything I knew hanging in the balance. I steeled myself for what was to come. Whatever horrors awaited us at the Evergreen Research Facility, I knew I had to face them for Chris, for my town, and for the very fabric of reality itself. As we raced through the chaotic streets of Evergreen Valley, the world around us seemed to be unraveling. The sky roiled with natural colors, and rifts in the fabric of reality appeared and disappeared in dizzying succession. The air was thick with an otherworldly static that made my skin crawl. Dr. Harris led the way, his face a mask of grim determination. Agent Chen brought up the rear, constantly scanning our surroundings for threats. I was sandwiched between them, clutching the beeping device that was our only guide. In this madness, we're getting close, Doctor, Harris shouted over the cacophony of scream and inhuman noises that filled the air. The facility should be just beyond Whispering Woods. As we approached the tree line, I noticed something unsettling. The trees were changing, their bark writhed, as if alive branches twisting into impossible shapes. Some seemed to be fusing together, forming grotesque arches and tunnels. Don't touch anything, Agent Chen warned as we entered the warped forest. Who knows what effect it could have on you? We pushed on the device in my hands, beeping more frantically with each step. The forest around us grew darker, the twisted trees blocking out what little light remained in the sky strange. Bioluminescent fungi pulsed in the shadows, casting an eerie glow over our path. Suddenly, a blood-curdling shriek pierced the air. We froze, watching in horror as a creature that defied description emerged from behind a gnarled tree. It was like a twisted amalgamation of insect and reptile, with too many limbs and eyes that seemed to look in all directions at once. Before we could react, Agent Chen had her weapon out, a sleek silver gun, unlike anything I'd ever seen. She fired, and a bolt of blue energy struck the creature, causing it to dissolve into a puddle of iridescent goo. Interdimensional nullifier, she explained. Briefly won't work on everything, but it should buy us some time. We pressed on, encountering more bizarre and terrifying entities as we got closer to the facility. Each encounter left me more shaken, my mind struggling to process the impossible things I was witnessing. Finally, we broke through the tree line into a familiar clearing. The Evergreen research facility stood before us, but it was barely recognizable. The once abandoned buildings were now alive with pulsating energy, their structures warped and twisted into mind-bending configurations. At the center of it all was the main building, now a towering monstrosity that seemed to stretch impossibly high into the swirling sky. A pillar of crackling energy shot up from its peak, puncturing the very fabric of reality. My God, Dr. Harris breathed. It's worse than I thought. The facility isn't just a conduit anymore. It's become a beacon calling out to other dimensions. How do we stop it? I asked, my voice trembling before Dr. Harris could answer. A familiar voice cut through the chaos, not from the device this time, but from the air around us. Danny, Dr. Harris, you have to hurry. It was Chris's voice, clearer than ever. The core, you have to shut down the core. It's in the basement where I disappeared, but be careful, they don't want you to stop it. They're using it to break through completely. Chris, I shouted, where are you? How can we get you back? I'm everywhere and nowhere. His voice replied, tinged with fear and confusion. This place, it's not like our world. Time and space don't work the same way, but I think if you shut down the core, it might pull me back. But Danny, whatever happens, you have to stop this. The fate of our world depends on it. His voice faded, leaving us in the eerie glow of the transformed facility. Dr. Harris turned to us, his face set with resolve. You heard him. We need to get to the basement and shut down the core. It won't be easy. Whoever or whatever is behind this will fight us every step of the way. Agent Chen checked her weapon. Take point, Daniel. Stay between us. And remember, trust nothing you see in there. This close to the source, reality itself will be fluid. As we approached the entrance to the facility, the air grew thick with tension. I could feel the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on me. This wasn't just about saving Chris anymore. The fate of our entire world hung in the balance. As we entered the facility, reality seemed to warp around us. Corridors stretched and twisted, defying the laws of physics. Shadows moved of their own accord, and whispers and unknown languages echoed through the halls. We fought our way through waves of interdimensional horrors, Agent Chen's weapon proving invaluable. Dr. Harris guided us with his knowledge of the facility's layout, though even he seemed disoriented by the nightmarish transformations. Finally, we reached the basement. The massive machine that had taken Chris now dominated the entire space, pulsing with eldritch energy there. Dr. Harris shouted over the deafening hum. The control panel as we approached a figure materialized before us. It was Chris, but not as I remembered him. His form flickered and shifted as if he wasn't fully in our reality. "Danny," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "You made it, Chris." I moved towards him, but Agent Chen held me back. "Wait," she warned. "Something's not right." Chris's face twisted into an inhuman grin. "Smart woman." But too late. Suddenly Chris's form exploded into a mass of writhing tentacles and eyes. The entity that had been masquerading as my friend lunged at us. Agent Chen fired her weapon, but the creature shrugged off the blast. Dr. Harris was knocked aside, leaving me face to face with the horror. In that moment, I heard Chris's true voice in my head. "Danny." The device used the device acting. On instinct, I pulled out the energy detecting device and held it towards the creature. It emitted a high-pitched whine, and the entity recoiled in pain. "The frequency," Dr. Harris yelled, struggling to his feet, "is disrupting its form." I cranked up the device to its maximum, setting the creature writhed and shrieked. Its form destabilizing now. "Danny," Chris's voice urged, "shut it down." I lunged for the control panel remat, slamming my hand down on the emergency shutdown button. The machine's hum rose to a deafening crescendo, then abruptly cut off a shock. A wave of energy exploded outward, and everything went white. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of the basement. The machine was silent, its lights dark. Dr. Harris and Agent Chen were slowly getting to their feet, and they're in. The center of the room was Chris, the real Chris, solid and whole. "Danny," he said weakly, "you did it," as we embraced, tears streaming down our faces. I knew it was over. The rifts in reality were closing. The interdimensional invasion poured in. The days that followed Evergreen Valley slowly returned to normal. The government covered up the incident, attributing the strange events to mass hysteria caused by a gas leak only a handful of us knew. The truth, Chris struggled to adapt, being back his memories of the other dimension, fading like a dream. Dr. Harris retired from teaching, dedicating himself to studying the data. We gathered. Agent Chen disappeared, but I had a feeling we hadn't seen the last of her. As for me, I was changed forever. I knew now that reality was far stranger and more fragile than I'd ever imagined. But I also knew the power of friendship, courage, and determination. In the face of cosmic horrors, Evergreen Valley was safe for now. But as I looked up at the stars at night, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets and dangers lurked in the vast unknown reaches of the multiverse. My name is CHR Chairstorm Ryder, and I'm 42 years old. What I'm about to tell you is a story about a time when things went very wrong for me and a few others in a small, almost forgotten town in Wyoming called Encampment. It was 2008, and I was working as a mechanic, which suited me just fine. I've always been good with my hands, fixing things getting dirty. There wasn't much I couldn't fix, or so I thought. Encampment isn't the kind of place you'd find on a map, unless you were really looking for it, nestled in the shadows of the Sierra Madre mountain range. It's a quiet town with a population of just under 500 people, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, for better or worse. For me, it was mostly for the better. I lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of town, didn't have many friends, but I got along well with my neighbor Tom, who ran the local Diner Tom's Place. The Rusty Spoon was a fixture and encampment. It was where folks gathered to swap stories over coffee in the morning, and where the day's gossip was dissected over pie in the evening. Tom and I would often spend our evenings there after closing talking about nothing in particular. Over a couple of beers it was, during one of these late night chats, that Tom first mentioned the disappearances. Now Wyoming has its share of missing hikers and hunters each year. The wilderness is vast and unforgiving, and it's easy for even experienced outdoors men to get lost, but this was different. These weren't out-of-towners who had wandered off the trail. These were locals, people who had lived an encampment their whole lives, who knew the land like the back of their hand. They were vanishing without a Tracy, it's like something's out there. Chris Tom said one night, his eyes darting to the window that looked out onto the darkened street. Something's hunting people. I laughed it off at first. You've been watching too many of those ghost hunting shows, Tom, I said, taking a swig of my beer. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something in Tom's voice, a note of genuine fear that made me uneasy. Life carried on as usual for a while after that conversation. I spent my days at the garage fixing up cars and chatting with the locals who came in, but Tom's words lingered in the back of my mind, and I found myself paying more attention to the whispered conversations around town. Then came the night that changed everything. I was at Tom's diner as usual. It was late and the place was empty, except for us. We were watching some old Western on the TV when suddenly the lights flickered. Tom and I exchanged a glance, but we shrugged it off and continued watching. The flickering stopped, and we forgot about it until Tom went to close up and found the back door wide open. I swear I locked it, he said, his face pale in the harsh fluorescent light of the kitchen. Maybe it was the wind, I suggested, but we both knew better. That door had a heavy latch. No wind was going to open it. Tom decided to stay over at my place that night. We didn't talk about it, but I knew he was spooked. I didn't mind the company. There was something comforting about having another person in the house, especially with the unsettling events of the evening. The next day, news came that another person had gone missing. This time it was Edna, an elderly lady who lived alone on the outskirts of town. Her place was found empty, door wide open, a pot of stew still simmering on the stove. No signs of struggle, no footprints, nothing. It was like she had just walked out and disappeared into thin air. The town was buzzing with the news. I could see the fear in people's eyes as they came into the garage, hear it in their hushed conversations. Some said it was a wild animal, maybe a bear or a mountain lion that had developed a taste for human flesh. Others talked about ghosts, spirits angry at the encroachment of the town on their ancient lands. A few even suggested there was a killer among us, picking off the vulnerable one by one. I started paying more attention to the stories Tom was telling me. We were both on edge, jumping at shadows and unexpected noises. The carefree evenings at the diner were replaced by tense discussions about the latest rumors and theories. One night I couldn't sleep. The silence of the town, usually so peaceful, now felt oppressive. It was around midnight when I decided to take a walk, hoping the cold night air would clear my head. As I passed by Edna's house, I saw something move in the shadows. I froze, squinting to see better, but there was nothing. I shook it off as my imagination. and turned around to go back home, but the feeling of being watched lingered. A few days later, I had a late night. Visitor Tom banged on my door, pale and shaking. I saw something, he gasped as I let him in the woods behind the diner. It wasn't natural, Chris. I grabbed my shotgun. It wasn't loaded, but it made us feel better, and we headed out the woods. Were pitch black, the beam of our flashlight seeming pitifully inadequate against the darkness. We didn't see anything that night, but we both felt like we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent our hearts racing. The disappearance continued, and the town was in a panic. People were locking their doors. Kids weren't allowed to play outside, and anyone who could leave did. Those of us who stayed were left with a sense of dread that hung over the town like a heavy fog. One evening, I was working late at the garage when I heard a noise outside. It sounded like a faint cry for help. I grabbed my flashlight and went to investigate. The sound was coming from the woods. Against my better judgment, I ventured in. I kept walking, calling out, but the cry stopped suddenly. There was silence so complete, it was almost deafening. I turned to head back when I saw it, a figure tall and gaunt with eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. It moved too fast for me to react. I stumbled back, falling over a log. By the time I got up, it was gone. I ran back to the garage, locked the doors, and called Tom. He came over, and we spent the night trying to make sense of what I saw. Both agreed it was something not natural, but what it was, we couldn't say. The next day, Sheriff Arnold came by. He was a tough guy, not easily rattled, but even he looked worried. He asked us to keep quiet about what we saw, said it would only cause more panic. He told us he was forming a search party to look for the missing people and asked if we'd join. We agreed. It wasn't like we had much of a choice. The search party consisted of me, Tom, Sheriff Arnold, and a few other towns folk. We combed the woods for days, finding nothing but more questions. One of the guys, Bill, swore he saw something similar to what I described, but no one else did. Then, one night it happened. We were camping out in the woods, taking turns, keeping watch. It was my shift when I heard rustling in the bushes. I pointed my flashlight and saw it again, those glowing eyes. Before I could react, it charged at us. The camp erupted into chaos. People were shouting, firing their guns blindly into the dark. I managed to get a clear shot, but it didn't seem to do any good. The thing was too fast. By the time the chaos died down, Bill was gone. We searched for him until dawn, but found no trace. Sheriff Arnold decided it was too dangerous to continue and called off the search. We headed back to town, defeated and terrified. Back in encampment, things got worse. More people went missing, and those who remained were too scared to leave their homes. The town felt like a ghost town with shuttered windows and empty streets. The fear was palpable, hanging in the air like a thick, choking fog. Tom and I decided to take matters into our own hands. We armed ourselves with whatever we could find, my shotgun, Tom's old hunting rifle, and a collection of homemade weapons that looked more likely to hurt us than any creature. We set out to hunt the thing, determined to end the terror that had gripped our town. We spent days tracking it, following the faintest of trails, strange markings on trees, tufts of coarse hair caught on branches, and the occasional glimpse of those haunting glowing eyes in the distance. Finally, we found its lair, a cave to deep in the woods. We could smell it before we saw it. A foul stench of decay that made our eyes water. We entered cautiously, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The cave was littered with bones, some animal, some unmistakably human. Then we saw it. The thing was hunched over gnawing on something. I didn't want to identify it. Looked up, eyes glowing, and let out a noise that sent chills down my spine. It was like a cross between a growl and a scream. Something no human throat could produce. It charged at us. Tom fired first, hitting it in the shoulder. I followed. Aiming for its head, it staggered but didn't go down. It was on us in seconds, knocking Tom to the ground. I fired again and again, emptying my gun into it until it finally collapsed. We stood there, panting, staring at the lifeless body. It looked human, but twisted, deformed. Its skin was a sickly grey, stretched tight over an emaciated frame. The hands ended in long, sharp claws, and its mouth was filled with rows of needle, like teeth. We dragged it out of the cave and burned it, not knowing what else to do. The disappearances stopped after that. Life and encampment slowly returned to normal, but the town was never quite the same. People who left never came back, and those who stayed never spoke about what happened. Tom and I kept our secret, telling ourselves it was for the best. Never talked about that night, but every now and then I catch him looking at the woods with a haunted look in his eyes. We survived, but we weren't the same. I still work at the garage, fixing cars, living my life. But every time I hear a noise in the woods, I wonder if there's something else out there, waiting. Sometimes late at night, I can still see those glow eyes and wonder if we really killed it or just made it angry. This is my story. It's not a happy one, but it's the truth, I guess. Some things are better left buried in the past, forgotten, like the town of Encampment. But the memories linger, and the fear never really goes away.